So we're going to put a waistband on our little miniature skirt here. So one of the first things you want to do, once you've got your zipper in and you've got your side pockets put in and everything, your pockets are pressed to the front, your side seams are all finished on the inside, clean finished with either zigzag, serge, or pinking. So the next step I want you to do is I want you to take your sides and line them up. And so you'll line up your darts. Your dart should be even, your side seams even, and then you'll see I've just cut a little notch there. Not too big, just a little indicator. You can also chalk it, whatever. I just want to mark that this is the center front of my skirt. So now I've got a little notch there to tell me. The next thing I want to do is I want to run a row of stay stitching along the top edge. So I've started at the back zipper. And because this seam allowance is only 3/8 of an inch, I'm just doing it's just a little bigger than a 1/4 inch, but not too much bigger, not the full 3/8. So stay stitching just kind of stabilizes this top edge. It will help prevent it from stretching as you're putting your waistband on. It'll just keep it sort of to the same width that it was at when it was cut from your paper pattern. Lots of times when you try something on, if you haven't stay stitched it, you can stretch this out a little bit. So when you try to put another piece on, like a waistband, the waistband doesn't seem big enough, and it's probably because this seam here got stretched a little bit out of shape when you were trying it on, or even just when you're sewing it. So stay stitching is good. I use this around necklines. I use this around the top of a waistband. Anytime you have an area that is going to maybe have a facing, anything like that, you want to run a row of stay stitching. Okay, so we've got our pattern. So you should have your paper pattern for this, and you'll notice on it in the middle there's the fold line. This is the line that you're going to fold your fabric down to. So your width of your waistband is only going to be less this seam allowance, so it's only going to be just about 1.25 inches high. Okay, different waistbands will be a different width. 1.25 inches is pretty standard for the width of a waistband. You should have your center front marked on your waistband. You will have your center back. Now on this seam here, this side, this is the one side, it's just at the seam allowance. You'll notice on this piece at the back on the right side, it's the back extension. So the center back is here about 1 inch. So this little piece here is actually going to stick out beyond where your zipper and your center back seam goes, and that's to allow an area to put a button or snaps or hook and eye, whichever means you want to close your back of your skirt waistband up with. It also will tell you you're going to cut one of your fabric to match the outside of your skirt, and cut one of interfacing. Now I generally will cut a full piece of interfacing, sometimes not. For this demonstration, I'm only putting like interfacing in half of it. So it will go from this is the half that gets sewn to the skirt. So take your strip of interfacing, and it's going to get fused here. I'm going to show you how to do that. So just be mindful that you can interface the full waist. It makes it just a little bit stiffer, so it depends on your fabric whether you want a nice stiff waistband or if you want it to have a little bit of softness to it and not be so rigid. Okay, so you see here I've cut out my waistband. So I've got my waistband cut. Got 2 of them here. So here's my waistband cut. I have fused my interfacing. So before I fused this down, what I did is I took this piece to the ironing board and I pressed it in half. So you can see both my raw edges match up. So I pressed it all the way in half lengthwise. So now I have a nice crease. So I was able to see where to lay my interfacing along to get it to butt right up against that fold line. Now in this, you see I've got a few pieces here I've sewn, or I've fused in. Generally you want your piece of interfacing to be one long piece. I'm just trying to maximize some little strips here that I have. So I'm going to show you this piece, which has one long piece. Okay, so my interfacing is fused right up to the edge of the fold. So then on the side that has no interfacing, I'm going to press that long raw edge up 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so that's the amount of my seam allowance. So I'm going to press that up to 3/8, and you can, your pattern may tell you to press up whatever 5/8 if your seam allowance is 5/8, and then trim it down to 3/8 or 1/4. It just sort of depends on your fabric. You do want to reduce some of this bulk. So I will probably, once I get this waistband sewn on to my skirt, I will trim this down to 1/4 of an inch, just so that when I'm sewing all of this in and this gets put onto my skirt, there's going to be several layers of fabric sandwiched into this waistband. So you don't want a lot of bulk here. You want to keep that waistband smooth. So I've got this interfacing, I've got it pressed 5/8. I've also, you can see, I've taken the marks that are on my paper pattern and I've just made sure to transfer them onto my piece of fabric here. So I've got my center back where my extension is on this side, and I've got it on this side. Now, one thing you also want to make note of is if you have put in a lap zipper, this is a centered zipper, so it really doesn't matter. But for a lap zipper, if you look here on the back, you will see that my lap is on the left-hand side at the back. So I want to make sure that that little extension is going to go on the right-hand side. So I want to make sure that when I sew this on, I have that extra little bit here. That's one reason why I have two waistbands. So when I sew the waistband right side to right side here, when I flip it up, you're going to see that there'll be a little extension here. So that way my waistband, when it comes back around and is sewn onto here, is nice. That line is nice and flat, and it continues right up to the top of the waistband, and my extension is on the right hand side. Okay, so I've got my piece all ready. I've got my skirt all taken and I've got it stay stitched. I've got my center front marked. I've got my center front of my waistband marked. So I'm now going to pin these two together along this top edge, matching the start, making sure that I start here. So make sure your edges are nice and even. Another nice thing about stay stitching is if this edge has got a little bit of a curve to it, and of course your waistband is a straight edge, you can take and you can actually clip. You can put little clips in here. So if I needed to just put a couple of clips, don't go through to cut the thread in your stay stitching. So you see now what happens is when I hold this out and I can actually pull this so that it will straighten that line out instead of being a curve. So I'm now got a straight edge getting pinned onto an edge that I can open up to be a little straighter instead of curved. It just makes the sewing a lot easier. So I'm going to pin this all along, and then I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I will meet you there, and we will sew this onto the skirt.